This is the WatchGeekTime podcast.
Thank you for tuning into Watch Geek Time. This is the Watch Geek Time podcast. It's a conversation about heritage, history, and why we're all so hooked on horology. So sit back, relax. We're going to talk about everything from watches to watches. The Watch Geek Time podcast is recorded live on Saturdays from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Also streamed live at WatchGeekTime.com and on Apple TV. I am your host and resident Watch Geek, Scott Goldman. On the boards as always is
Jody. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Jody, good to have you. You know, every week we get together and we geek out about watches. And before we get started, we talk about what are on the wrists of these geeks, meaning Jody and myself. Jody, what are you wearing?
Yes, this one's a, believe it or not, a Chinese tourbillon.
Oh, I believe it. I looked at it before the show. I believe it's Chinese.
Yeah, and I mean it's in this rotating carriage, which is probably the only big highlight on the dial here. But like, I mean, I will admit it is very reminiscent of a Panerai.
It does look like it wants to be a Radomir, so I don't know why it has to be so uninspired. Not that a Radomir is uninspiring, but why the Chinese chose to make a watch to look like a Panerai, I don't know.
I think maybe because, like, if you're at the ball and you're hoping these older people across the room see it and they think, oh, he's got a Panerai. Maybe.
But anybody who saw it would know instantly it's... all right. It's very interesting. And so just for our audience, Jody, what does a Chinese tourbillon sell for?
This one was going, I think it was about $1,200.
So you've got yourself a tourbillon for $1,200.
Yeah.
We'll talk about fit and finish a little bit later.
It doesn't even have a complication in it.
Now you're talking. Now you're with it. It does have a screw down crown, though, I noticed earlier. Listen, the striping on the back is pretty nice. The strap is nice. It keeps probably excellent time. You and I set it to a clock before we started the show, so we'll see how it did by the end of the show. How's
Sure.
that? Okay.
Sounds good.
I am wearing a circa 1970 Jaeger LeCoeur.
I know, I'm quietly envious even sitting over here looking.
It's cool,
at it.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's very nice.
It's got a Valjoux 72 chronograph inside. It beats at 18,000 vibrations per hour. That's 2.5 hertz for those of us who listened to the show last week. And I love it. It's my only chronograph with buttons on it like that. You know, I'm not big into the chronographs, but when somebody made this one available, I had to have it.
It is nice. And you got the thing I really like about it is the orange stitching with the band. Really.
You know, you can see an article about this very watch and where and why and how to choose a strap at our blog, WatchGeekTime.com. Strap Me Up is the article.
Right.
It originally appeared on a blog to watch.com. Anyways, today's show is jam-packed. Of course, we've got our history lessons, our heritage lessons. We're going to talk about Vacheron Constantin and Audemars Piguet. Also, our special word that we talked about last week at the end of the show, tourbillon. Oh,
Tourbillon.
Jody, you're wearing a tourbillon.
I am.
You're very clever.
I am.
How about that? So, before we jump into the history, we talk about the email from last week. So take it away, Jojo.
Okay, let me pull this up. So what do we got here? So we got Trudy from Sherman Oaks, California, and she writes, Scott, my husband is about to turn 40 and I know he wants a watch. And I know he loves Bell & Ross. What do you think about the brand and is there a particular model that you would recommend?
Oh, it's a good question.
Well, the Bell & Ross.
Well, the Bell & Ross is one of those watches that follows the DNA of instruments on an airplane. So if you see the Bell & Ross brand, it's a very square watch.
Right.
It's not what you would call a pincushion case, which also has sort of a square feel, but a round dial.
Right.
This is truly a square watch. They're sometimes contoured to the wrist, but they're beautiful and they're very, very nicely manufactured. Trudy, I don't think you can go wrong. Depending on what your husband's tastes are, you can go all the way up to, $70,000, $80,000 with a Bell & Ross.
Okay.
Sometimes they come in solid gold or white gold or platinum. And I also think they have a tourbillon or 3 or 4, but you're probably better going under $6,000. They have a Phantom or a Stealth series, very dark, blacked out face for the guy who doesn't care what time it is.
Right.
And I think your husband's got good taste, so go for it. Bell & Ross is a great brand.
Very good.
Okay.
Great. We've got another one here. This is Sean from Stamford, Connecticut. And he writes...
Sean from Stamford?
Yeah.
All right.
As a guy who works in the city of New York, I've noticed how important it is to wear a nice watch. Yeah. Everyone seems to have a Rolex or a Patek. Mm-hmm. Is there a brand you would recommend to the guy that wants something different in that league?
Oh, Sean, you're speaking to my soft spot. Sean from Stamford, who has to go to the city. Georges Lecoultre. Let's start there. Yeah.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, if you're going to go spend $7,000 or $9,000 on a Rolex, you've got to take a look at a JLC. You've got to look at Ulysse Nardin. You got to look at some of these other brands that are out there. I will never begrudge anybody for getting a Rolex. I think it's got more cachet, that is, than any other watch. I often refer to Rolex as not being a watch. It's a Rolex.
Right.
Rolex is a very unique brand, and it's more like currency, more like any other brand. But Georges Lecoultre, I'd say take a look. Omega, a very, very nice line of watches. Can't go wrong. And if you're definitely dressing to impress, Georges Lecoultre makes some thin dress watches that, to me, Sean, are unparalleled in beauty. So, and heritage and history and all the other things that go along with wanting a nice watch. So, if you have a question or comment, please email us, Scott@WatchGeekTime.com. And without further ado, let's talk about one of the world's oldest brands.
Looking forward to this.
Vacheron Constantin. So, it's interesting. Their motto, Jody, is founded in 1755 on an island in Lake Geneva and still there.
That's interesting. I think that's fantastic, actually.
It's also, as we were talking earlier, the only brand of all the Swiss brands that has never closed its doors, never stopped production of any kind, even when they were down to 2 watchmakers.
Right.
And cranking out, I think, 2 watches a month. Right. But they still never stopped. So, Vacheron Constantin was originally created by a guy named Jean-Marc Vacheron. And his watches were world-renowned for being highly complicated and fitted with beautifully engine-turned dials. Vacheron's customers were emperors like Napoleon, dukes, and popes. I think Pope Pius had a couple of his watches. Right. And like so many of the other stories we've heard about great watchmakers, it was actually Vacheron's son, Abraham, who took over the family business in 1785 and somehow managed to keep the company alive. Right. Despite the French Revolution, which was going on right outside the window. And, of course, we know the revolution didn't end until 1799. So he somehow managed to keep making watches. In 1810, as is often the case, nepotism continued throughout the Vacheron family through to Jean-Marc's grandson, Jacques Vacheron. He took over the company and was the first to initiate exports to England, Italy, and other parts of Europe. Jacques quickly realized he wouldn't be able to handle all the demand alone, and in order to travel and sell the company's products, he needed a partner. And in around 1820, Vacheron Constantin, who was an associate of Jacques, eventually became a partner, and it led to the renaming of the company in 1825 to Vacheron Constantin. It was actually Vacheron and Constantin, and then they changed it again to Vacheron Constantin, which I think sounds better. In 1833, the firm hired Georges Lechaud. He was an inventor whose only job it was to supervise the manufacturing operations, and as it turned out, his impact not only helped Vacheron Constantin achieve its greatest success, Lechaud's maverick approach to standardizing watch movements into calibers indeed also had great impact on the entire watchmaking industry. The pantograph, which is one of his cooler inventions. God, it's a hard word to say for some reason.
Pantograph.
The pantograph, one of his more important inventions, often thought of as Lechaud's greatest invention, actually, allowed for the mechanical engraving of small watch parts and dials. And this single invention pushed Vacheron Constantin much further forward than almost any other watchmakers at the time. When Constantin passed in 1854 and Vacheron passed just 9 years later in 1863, as these things go, the company was taken over by a series of heirs, including two women, one from Vacheron's family, the other from Constantin's family.
Wow.
Today, Vacheron Constantin is one of the Richemont brand's crown jewels. Yeah, really important brand. VC, as fondly referred to by many watch collecting purists, is credited with and has patented a multitude of watchmaking firsts, including the first fully non-magnetic timepiece that included an escape lever,
Wow.
balance wheel, and balance spring made of an alloy known as palladium. Palladium's a cool metal. And it was right around this time that the company adopted the Maltese cross as a symbol of its absolute commitment to excellence in watchmaking. VC became a leading provider of watch movements to prestigious brands, including Fabergé, whose third imperial egg housed a Vacheron Constantin ladies' watch as the surprise. And it's also worth mentioning that VC had an 80% ownership in Jaeger-LeCoultre.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's cool, right?
Yeah.
Good fact. As mentioned, today the company is wholly owned by the Richemont Group, who bought the firm from a Saudi sheikh who almost ran it into the ground back in 1996. And while VC doesn't make their production numbers public, they're currently producing approximately 20 watches a year.
Or 20,000.
Did I say 20 watches?
Yeah.
20,000 watches a year. In 2005, Johann Rupert, who's still the chairman and CEO of the Richemont Group, named Juan Carlos Torres as VC's head honcho. And during his tenure, the world's most complicated timepieces, the Tour de Ile, a timepiece made to mark the firm's 250th anniversary, has come out, and to mark the firm's 260th anniversary, the world's most complicated mechanical timepiece, simply known as reference 57260. It was made at the request of one of their top clients. It took 3 watchmakers to about 8 years to complete the 57 complication-housed marvel.
Wow.
It's said that the collector paid anywhere from $18 million to $20 million.
Whoa, hang on. Really?
Yeah, it was a lot of money.
Wow.
The influence of Gerald Genta is also seen on a multitude of the VC timepieces. We're going to talk about Gerald Genta when we get to Audemars Piguet, including the famed Vacheron Constantin 222, which housed a Jaeger-LeCoultre caliber used exclusively in the 222. Oh, well, that tells me Jody wants us to go to commercial.
Sorry to say, let's go. We're on the clock.
Well, we're going to talk more about the holy grail of watches in a moment. We're going to be right back after these words. This is the Watch Geek Time podcast. Thanks for listening. These are our sponsors. It's the only way Jody can afford a Chinese tourbillon.
Omega co-axial, the most perfect mechanical watch movement in the world.
And now, here's the Watch Geek, Scott Goldman.
I am the Watch Geek. Just like the man said, my name is Scott Goldman. I am your host. To my right is
Jody.
Jody, before we left, we were just about to talk about Gerald Genta, so I just want to finish a point about the Vacheron Constantin 222. Remember a couple weeks ago, our good friend Mark Matthews came into the studio and he shared his 222 and the stories about it. And that's a watch that is got the Gerald Genta DNA all over it. He is one of the most famous watch designers of all time. His design language has found its way into many different timepieces, from the Patek Philippe Nautilus all the way down to the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. So, with that said, welcome back to Watch Geek Time. The Watch Geek Time podcast can be streamed live on Saturdays between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. Pacific Time. And please go to WatchGeekTime.com. You'll see photos of everything we're talking about and also a bunch of great stories. Shout out to my man Sergey, who's been doing a great job of keeping our Twitters going, our Twitter.
Actually, really good job.
Really good,
Yeah.
right? And what's the other thing? Our Instagram. We got an Instagram. It's Watch Geek Time Pics. That's Watch Geek Time Pix. And, of course, at Watch Geek Time on the Twitter. So, enough about Vacheron Constantin.
I would just love to see one under a loop. I mean, one of the original
One of the old ones?
movements.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd love to.
Going back to your days in Australia, do you remember this brand there? Because it is one of the few brands that's permeated just about every part of the world.
Not that particular one, no.
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 How about this next one we're going to talk about, Audemars Piguet?
I believe, yes. Yes.
It's interesting because Audemars Piguet's brand slogan is to break the rules. You must first master them. And I think it's really interesting. I think maybe you've heard of them because of their exposure in various movies. But this particular brand was founded in 1875 by watchmakers Jules Louis Audemars and Edouard Auguste Piguet. I just got to say, I love how all these watchmakers have these hyphenated first names. I mean, Abraham Louis Breguet, Jean-Marc Vacheron, Jules Louis, Edouard Auguste. If you didn't have a hyphenated first name, I don't think you could be taken seriously as a watchmaker. It's just a thought. Anyways, AP is often regarded to be among the highest end of Swiss watch manufacturers, and it's part of a very small club made of brands such as Patek Philippe, Long & Sona, Jaeger-LeCoultre, and of course the brand we previously spoke about, Vacheron Constantin. The company started its production in La Brassus. That's why before the show I was going, La Brassus.
Yes.
La Brassus.
Yes.
And Le Locle, Switzerland. It has points of presence all in over 88 countries, and AP is one of the world's oldest watch manufacturers. Even more unique is the fact that the company is still owned by its founding families. Very unusual in this day and age.
It is.
Yeah. As we know through various history lessons, as well as a number of discussions on Watch Geek Time podcast, early 18th century farmers and villagers in the Val d'Ajou turned to watchmaking during the long, harsh winters when the Swiss landscape would lie dormant. The cows didn't have anything to graze on. They weren't making any milk. Nobody was churning any butter. Nobody's making any cheese. And over the years, the craft of watchmaking not only became a family tradition, but a national heritage. And like so many other Swiss families, the Audemars and the Piguets crafted timepieces long before the establishment of Audemars Piguet. In fact, a pocket watch that was made between 1740 and 1760, that's like over 350, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's not only that, it was signed Joseph Piguet. It still exists today, and it's at the museum. of Audemars Piguet in Val d'Ajou. Val d'Ajou means Valley of the Watch or Valley of Time, really.
Right.
Yeah. Audemars Piguet is really a story of a strong friendship between Jules Audemars and Edward Piguet at the tender age of 23. Audemars engaged his childhood buddy, Piguet, who was only 21, to build a factory that would manufacture watch movements. The two pals had great success with their customers and appeared to be the very best at what they did. After joining forces, their focus became the manufacture of complicated movements for other luxury brands such as Tiffany and Company. And this was sort of in a competition with Jaeger LeCoultre, who was making movements for Cartier. Once they had the necessary tools and expertise in place, the friends decided they should be making watches of their own. And so they split their work, with Jules producing and assembling movements, while Edward ensured all the completed movements were correctly regulated and properly fitted. In short, Audemars made the parts and Piguet became the finisher. To this day, finishing is still one of the top and most important jobs in watchmaking, by the way. And later their roles would change as Jules moved more into the technical design of complication movement manufacturing, while Edward would end up focusing on sales and building the brand into the international powerhouse it is today. So what's also of note is from the very beginning of this partnership, watches made by Jules, Louis, and Edward Auguste were considered amongst the very best in the world, and to this day are prized by their owners and admirers alike for their uncompromising quality and precision. And as is often the case with these storied brands, when World War I created a number of difficulties for all the watch brands, AP included, this was when the company almost went completely under and faded away. But they survived. And like so many other stories we've heard, the founders, who almost always seem to pass at or very near the same time. Right. The same hold true for AP. Jules Audemars died in 1918 and Piguet died a year later in 1919. And like so many other stories we've heard, in 1920 was Paul Louis Audemars and Paul Edward Piguet, the respective sons of the founders, who also have hyphenated first names, took over the company to provide a revigorated impetus. Unfortunately, this was right on the front toe of the Great Depression, and by 1933, the company had only 2 employees producing just a couple of timepieces a year.
Oh, now, if you found one of those timepieces, that'd be hot. Yeah.
And I'm sure they exist. Probably most of them are in their museum.
Right.
I'm guessing. I'd be guessing.
Okay.
But it would seem that those would be very, very prized watches.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were so bespoke. So the company managed to actually reinvent itself at the end of the war by producing high-end chronograph movements that they would sell to other watch manufacturers. But then in 1949, the company attended the first Basel Fair, and as they say, the rest is history. From 1954 to 1971, AP enjoyed its greatest era of prosperity, which came to an abrupt halt during what has come to be known as the quartz crisis of the 70s. At this time, the company realized it needed a revolutionary change, and that's when it introduced a timepiece the likes of which had never been seen before. Actually, one of the most famous watches to date. It's known as the Royal Oak. One of my personal favorites is the rarely seen Star Wheel. I can't even really explain it to you, so please go see it at WatchGeekTime.com. But we're going to come back and talk about the Royal Oak because that's really the watch that made it happen for Audemars Piguet. And as things tend to go, it takes a huge amount of work and even a huger stroke of luck for an independent brand to explode into the mainstream. And for AP, that stroke of luck was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Arnold's been seen wearing a Royal Oak in any number of his movies, including End of Days and Terminator, and it's also resulted in special edition releases with his namesake on.
Okay.
And his watches, for whatever reason, the Royal Oaks with Arnold Schwarzenegger are worth a ton of money, just like the Panerai Daylight series for Sylvester Stallone, or what they call the Slytech.
Right.
It's amazing, actually. A lot of amazing people have worn Audemars Piguet, like Muhammad Ali, and it's rumored that the champ had a collection worth several $1 million. Following the lead of Rolex, AP ambassadors have included a number of world-class athletes such as Nick Faldo, Serena Williams, and LeBron James. The great chess champion, Garry Kasparov, he became an ambassador about 20 years ago, leading to the company's creation of the millenary Garry Kasparov. The millenary is a sort of an oval-cased Audemars Piguet.
Okay.
Also, you can see it on our WatchGeekTime Pixex Instagram. And this particular watch sports a GMT, a second time zone, and a power reserve. So it's kind of neat. Audemars Piguet has a number of world firsts to add to its long list of existing credits, including the smallest minute repeating calibers and what's come to be known as a deadbeat or jumping seconds hand. We all know a jump or deadbeat seconds hand jumps from second to second. Looks like a quartz watch, but it's not. It's a mechanical watch.
Right.
It's very difficult to execute a jumping seconds hand.
Right.
And they're also thought to have made the first skeletonized movement back in 1882. And of course, they're very famous for using particular alloys and very interesting case metals. The influence of Gerald Genta, the Nautilus, the Royal Oak, the 222, Hublot, so many other timepieces that still have Genta's design language all over them. And this is no different for the Royal Oak. As the story goes, AP's managing director, George Golay, called the designer and told him the Italian market fair was expecting an unprecedented watch in steel, and that he, Golay, needed the designer, Genta, to create a very special watch to present at the fair.
In steel.
In steel. Unbelievable. 24 hours later, Genta delivered the sketches for what was to become the Royal Oak, and of course, AP's masterpiece. It was the first high-end sports watch made of steel. The Royal Oak was instantly recognizable by its octagonal bezel and 8 hexagonal screws. The dials are generally hand-turned guilloche that feature a textured tapestry motif. Since the original release, the Royal Oak, whose namesake is tied to the name of a famous British warship called by the same name, many models have come forward, but Genta's original design DNA remains intact. So they've had about 70, 80 variants of the watch since its launch, but it's all looking like Gerald to me.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Scott.
That's hey, listen, I think I don't know we have much to talk about for that.
I was just going off my Chinese tourbillon here, and it's actually holding time.
It's still got the right time. This is the Watch Geek Time podcast. We're going to step aside, let the man have his due, so that I can afford another Valjoux and Jody can have another tourbillon.
When you wrestle a gorilla, you don't stop when you're tired. You stop when the gorilla's tired. That's why, if you have a prang and your wheels just aren't turning, the good folks at More Than could send you a courtesy car within 2 hours. To find out more, visit morethan.com. I'm More Than Freeman. Thank you for listening.
Excludes Northern Ireland. Offer may be withdrawn at any time. Terms and conditions apply. Comprehensive cover only using our recommended repairers.
There is a watchmaking standard that is revered around the world. That standard comes from Rolex. From clasp to bracelet to its unique watertight oyster case, a Rolex holds its value because it was intended to. Crafted from just 3 precious metals, platinum, steel, and gold, each defies the ordinary. Its steel, 904L, virtually indestructible and corrosion resistant, is incomparable. Its patented Ever Rose Gold, created in an exclusive foundry, will remain beautiful for life. Inside, a genuine Rolex movement is a product of superiority and remarkable testing. It is unrivaled. At Rolex, flawless standards create more than a watch. They create a value that was meant to endure. For a complete selection of Rolex timepieces, visit your official Rolex jeweler.
Available at Lux, Bond, and Green Jewelers, Westport, Greenwich, and other locations throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts, where every box has a story.
This is the Watch Geek Time podcast.
Welcome back to Watch Geek Time. I am your host and resident watch geek, Scott Goldman. On the boards is
Jody.
Jody. We left off talking about Audemars Piguet and Gerald Genta. I recommend anybody go and Google Gerald Genta. He's no longer with us, but clearly he's had a huge impact on the watch world and how things are designed. And his name is synonymous with things like Royal Oak. So that said, AP employs over 1,500 employees worldwide. They have a revenue of roughly $600 million per year. They own a great little design studio called Renaud & Poppy, just downstairs from their main office. Renaud & Poppy is known for making all the really cool watches in the world. If you're an independent watch guy and you want something really complicated, you go see these guys, Renaud & Poppy. That's where Grubel and Forsey got their start before they went out on their own. They left an independent to become independent to be bought by Richemont as well. I don't know what that means.
It's just how it goes.
Just how it goes. Currently, the company is helmed by a guy named Francois-Henri Benamas, or Benamayas, but again, he's got that hyphenated first name, Francois-Henri. He has served as the company's CEO since 1999. Originally from the fashion industry and sometimes referred to as the Zen Master, Francois pretty much wrote the book on doing, not trying. Find out more about Audemars Piguet at their website, AudemarsPiguet.com. And by the way, it's spelled AudemarsPiguet.com. Also a link at WatchGeekTime.com. All right, Jody, so this week's word is?
This is a complicated word, Scott, but tourbillon.
All right, tourbillon. Like you're wearing a tourbillon.
Exactly. Yeah.
A tourbillon was invented by Abraham Louis Breguet, one of the world's greatest watchmakers. It was designed to overcome the problems of gravity. You know, if you were a rich guy back in the day and you had a pocket watch and you took it out of your pocket and checked it and put it back in your pocket, gravity pulled on that spring and it caused the watch to drift or have a problem. And Breguet figured out, you can't have that if you work on the railroad, because if you work on the railroad and you're supposed to pull your lever at 10:15 and I'm on the train and I keep checking my watch and you keep checking yours, we're screwed. So he came up with the tourbillon that takes the oscillator and puts it into a rotating cage to overcome.
You look at the dangers of that. Like 1 minute is a lot of time.
It's enough. Sort of it's enough to make trains crash.
Right,
for sure.
Yeah.
So, tourbillon, probably one of the greatest inventions. In French, it means whirlwind, because you know how hypnotic it looks looking down at your dial there, Daddy-o.
Look at this thing move.
Oh, you're not only looking at your watch, you're pushing the pot.
You know what? This hasn't lost time either.
No, it's keeping great time.
Yeah, it's great.
This is the Watch Geek Time podcast. We're going to step aside, let the man have his due. But we'll be right back. Stick around.
A hungry bird said to a crocodile, "Can I have those bits of meat stuck between your teeth?" "Dive in," said the crocodile. "I've had a good nosh." Next day, the grateful bird brought all his mates, and from then on, the birds were never hungry, and the crocodiles never had to fork out for a hygienist. And the moral is, goodwill spread around gets around. This story was brought to you by ING Direct, 92% of whose mortgage customers would recommend them to a friend. ING Direct, a decent way to do banking. Visit ingdirect.co.uk.
UK residents 18 plus, 50,000 to £1 million subject to status. 92% based on ING Direct customer satisfaction survey, April 2011.
Sometimes you get more done without a boss. Not that leadership isn't valuable. It's just that when you don't have anyone looking over your shoulder, you often come up with better stuff. At Honda, we run our research and development team as a separate company, giving them room to mess around, doodle, try, fail, try again, and eventually come up with something that surprises them as much as it surprises us. Do you believe in the power of dreams?
Rolex, Patek Philippe, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Omega, Cartier, Breguet, and just about any other watch brands that come to mind. This is the Watch Geek Time podcast.
It's the time of the season when love runs high. In this time, give it to me easy. And let me
Well, Jody,
It's that time.
it's almost that time. It's always that time on Watch Geek Time, Jody.
It is.
Before we say goodbyes and all that stuff for this week, Jody, can you give us a hint about next week's
Well,
word?
you know, I would love to work and talk about this word monopulsante.
We shall talk about monopulsante next week. As a matter of fact, I think we'll have a guest who will be bringing one of his, or maybe even two of his monopulsantes.
That sounds great.
So, of course, many, many thanks to all the great resources Jody and I cherry-picked this sweet stuff from. Thank you to WatchTime.com. Remove the geek in the middle. WatchTime.com, great place to find glossaries of terms for watch geeking. Thanks to a blog to watch.com, Ariel Adams, good guy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to PuristPro.com, one of my favorite websites. And of course, thanks so much to my announcer, David. And a shout out to our cool web guy, Sergey.
Sergey, he's done a great job.
Oh, man.
Fantastic.
Please visit our website, WatchGeekTime.com. On Instagram at WatchGeekTimePix, P-I-X. And at WatchGeekTime on the Twitter. Hey, Jody.
Yeah.
Next week, our guests are going to include Gary Vedetta is going to be on the phone. I am sorry he didn't make it this week. But this next week, he's with us. He's going to talk about all the new finds at Elements in Time.
That'll be great.
All right. And, of course, my thanks to Jody, my wingman,
Thank you.
my fellow Watch Geekster. He made the trip all the way from Cane and Doom Road today, where he's been busting glasses and spilling all kinds of shit.
Creating havoc at the moment.
I won't bust your secret wide open. It's a conversation about heritage, history, and why we're all so hooked on horology. It's the WatchGeekTime.com podcast. We'll see you next week. Until then, bye-bye.